Courtney, are you with us on the Secret Teachings?
I am here.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Ryan. I want to thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. I'm also here with my guest host, Ira Robinson. He's very interested in remote viewing. I think he's done a little himself as well. Isn't that right, Ira?
I have indeed. I've experimented with it quite a bit over the years, and I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you, Courtney, and hear your salient thoughts on the whole subject.
Hey, Ira. It's great to speak with you.
I just wanted to make sure that we've got everything right. Farsight.org is the website.
That's right.
All right.
That's right. Farsight.
Perfect. And you also have farsightpresentations.com and courtneybrown.com links to go check out your work and you a little bit on your biography. And maybe we can actually start with that. Give me a little bit of a background on you. Who is Courtney Brown and what you're trying to accomplish with this research?
Sure. Well, I am a university professor at a major university, but I don't do any of the remote viewing research at the university. At the university, I teach mathematics in a social science program, usually statistics and differential equations, things like that. But the remote viewing research I do at the Farsight Institute. That's FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G, and it's like seeingfar.org. And that is the largest venue. Actually, I can say it's the largest, biggest, and best because it's the only venue where you can get these full-blown public projects on remote viewing, as it is done using procedures, methodologies that were derived by the U.S. military and used actively for espionage purposes, or methodologies that are derivative of those procedures. So, we're the only show in town where this happens. There's a lot of people talking about doing remote viewing, but in terms of seeing it in action, we're it.
So you guys are really the only institute that is researching this phenomenon.
Well, you have other people researching it, other individuals researching it, but we're the only one where these full-blown projects using the best remote viewers on the planet Earth are done so that the public can see it. And so you have other people doing it, but they do it in a very different way. There are thousands of people who have written articles about remote viewing, but those are always like research done behind closed doors, and it's usually dealing with untrained college kids who are told how to remote view for 15 minutes, and then they're looking for statistically significant results, which they often find. But these procedures are, to be masterful of them, these procedures really take years of dedicated practice. It's probably, in order to get world-class good, like the remote viewers that we work with are, it's very much like Lang Lang playing the piano in Carnegie Hall. Anybody can play the piano and you can make noise. You can demonstrate that the piano does, in fact, play music and you can do things with it. But it's hard to play the piano. And if you really want to get good like Lang Lang, where everything just sort of flows in playing Carnegie Hall, that took a lot of effort and a lot of time and a huge amount of practice. And that's what remote viewing is like. If this was really easy to do, we wouldn't be having shows about this. We wouldn't be talking about this as an ooh-ah phenomenon. If it was really easy to do, everybody would already know it, like breathing. Do you have to have a show on how to breathe? Everybody knows how to breathe. Well, remote viewing, you can get intuitions, but to get them so that they're highly structured, spot on every time, and that the intuitions and the descriptions of these things called targets are so perfect that it's like they were there with their own eyes. Remember, remote viewing is a mental process for perceiving across time and space, in apparent complete violation of the laws of physics as they were taught at the university, which is a real joke at the university level because the laws of physics, the fundamental paradigms of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics, those are the billboards of physics taught in universities worldwide, are over 100 years old. Those fundamentals haven't changed a dime for over 100 years. So they're wrong. Science never stays still just for stuff like that. Now, the details have changed. I'm a mathematician, so I really appreciate the improvements and the advances that have been done mathematically with regard to quantum mechanics and relativistic physics. But, despite the fact that we know some of the details much better, we do quantum computing now, We have merged the relativity realm, which used to be just in the macro big realm like you and I, with the quantum realm to produce what's called the standard model. But despite all those sort of finesses, those are details around the edges. The big fundamentals haven't changed for way over 100 years. And so, you're really talking about a revolution, not just in social sciences, archaeological revolution. I mean, you're not talking about just sort of applied revolutions, but revolutions in the way of thought with regard to the very basic fundamentals of physics. Now, we do have a very good idea of the physics of remote viewing, how it actually does work. And great advances have been made, but they're peripheral in the physics realm right now. They were originally developed by a physicist named Hugh Everett, who got his PhD under John Wheeler at Princeton, and his dissertation in 1957 was widely laughed at and scoffed at in his day, but he was the one who came up with the idea of the other worlds, or parallel universes, because of a frequency-based interpretation of the universe. And everyone said, no, we're solid, everything's here. I mean, I see you, you see me, we're obviously pieces of rock, that type of stuff. And it was Hugh Everett that said, no, there's no such thing as that. All you have is frequencies. And that gave birth to the other world's interpretation of quantum mechanics. And currently, I understand it's approximately 18% of mainstream physicists now adopt the other world interpretation of quantum mechanics as being correct, which means that 82% are still stuck with the old Copenhagen model, which basically means that those ones are older, and we're waiting for them to retire and die off and replaced by the other world's, new guys.
By this younger generation that's coming about.
That's exactly right, and it takes time. But the old standard model of quantum mechanics and the relativistic ideas that there's only a single version of us and we're solid in a solid universe, and thus there cannot be any other universes, and we must obey the laws of relativity. You cannot send information backward and forward in time, perceptions or things or anything else. Those things are just as obsolete as a club is with regard to a caveman. I mean, They're just not true, and there's plenty of data indicating that those things are routinely violated, but physicists have a myopic view of life and simply do not look. They literally forbid the looking at data that violate those things. So we're just waiting for, and the minds are very stubborn. And I'm a university professor. I live with these people. So I know the minds are very closed. And so we just have to wait for generational replacement, which is something that Max Planck taught us, well over 100 years ago, around the turn of the century, the last century, that, big changes in science don't really happen because someone comes up with a new idea. What really happens is people are very stuck in the mud, and you have to wait for generational replacement with a group of people who were acclimatized to certain ideas, retire and die off, and are replaced by the new generation. But that doesn't really solve the problem, because that means that the new generation are stuck in the mud with regard to their ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
What's very, very interesting is how difficult it is for people to change their ideas once they are set in stone. That's the big issue with regard to extraterrestrial life, with regard to many of the projects we do at the Farsight Institute, with regard to remote viewing. It's not that people haven't come up with great ideas. It's that the current people are the same as the past people, which are people get stuck. And the real trick in helping this planet and changing the planet and saving humanity and doing all that good, cool, interesting stuff is trying to come up with a way, an angle to get around the psychology of mass belief systems. That's the real thing. It's not really an issue of discovering some new technical wizardry or discovering some new theory. The issue is a mass psychology of humans that is rigid as the Rock of Gibraltar, and we're trying to find ways to get around it. We're looking for elements of theater shock at this point. Really, it's not an issue of discovering things. We've discovered a zillion things. The issue is, how do you wake up a humanity that's comatose, or better yet, is like petrified rock?
Yeah, people are scared. They're fearful. Courtney, a lot of scientists nowadays, it seems, they do their investigations, if they're considered real scientists, I guess, and what they'll do is they'll find evidence to support a preconceived conclusion, and any evidence to the contrary they just wipe away as being nonsense.
That's exactly what happened. This is really a big deal in archaeological realms. For example, my son, who's just now graduating from with a degree in archaeology, he was out in the desert last summer talking to some archaeological graduate students and saying, "Well, what about these other archaeological things? You know, things that were discovered like devices, hammers, things like that, buried in strata that were, you know, millions of years old, clearly out of time and place. What about those things? There's apparently a huge record of stuff like that." And they looked at him straight in the face and said, "If we even talk about that stuff, we are banned for life in the discipline. We can't get published. We can't get a job. Nothing works. So just be quiet."
That's
Literally.
that's exactly what we were talking. Ira and I were talking about last week on another show. We were talking about how there are literally there is physical evidence and photographic evidence of footprints that have been found in coal seams that date back 12 million years, and they're footprints of a ribbed sole shoe. They're footprints that they're like a size 10 shoe that are found in the Gobi Desert. The Russians and the Chinese found this during a joint expedition a couple of decades ago. And scientists, archaeologists, they just, like you said, they write it off. And if they speak about it, then they're relieved from their field. I mean, it's just like doctors who talk about cancer cures. They can have their medical license stripped.
Yeah, actually, that's the same with. Yeah, that's exactly the same. So you know, there's some really big time books that have come out recently, such as Forbidden Archaeology. That is a book. Let me see. The best way to think about the forbidden archaeology thing is, well, the author is Michael Cremo, Cremo, but the best way to think about it is that he's not a professional PhD archaeologist, but he was someone who was like you and I, extremely wondering about why archaeology is not taking into account all of these deep findings of things that are anomalous, things that are literally buried in the ground that people dig up, but that don't fit with the strata. And so he's an extremely intelligent man, and he wrote a book that is way better than a zillion books published by PhDs in any type of field, called Forbidden Archaeology. That was
Are you guys still there?
I am. I think we lost him.
I think we did too. Let me see if I can reconnect here. Now
again, the funny timing of the subjects that get talked about. You see,
that's how it always works. Courtney, are you still with us? Yeah. Now my computer's all messed up here. I'm telling you what, Ira, this is not. I'm not making this up. There's something weird. This happens every single time we do something like this. My Skype
it sure does.
My Skype just completely shut off on me, and my internet just restarted itself.
Oh, good God.
So I'm not sure what that is. I think Courtney's calling us back right now. Let's go ahead and accept this.
Okay.
And it just kicked him off again. I'll tell you what, man. This is like, you know, you people that are doing this. Do you have to make it this blatant? Really? Come on.
Yeah, I just saw in his message he said that he is here.
okay.
Yeah, there you are.
I can
there
hear you.
you.
My internet just restarted, and my Skype turned off completely on me when we started talking about the forbidden archaeology.
Oh, okay.
Every time certain subjects come up, man, it always ends up happening.
But go ahead.
Are we on now?
Yeah, we're still on. Just go ahead and you were talking about the forbidden archaeology, Michael Cremo's book. If you wanted to go ahead and finish up what your comments were about that.
Sure. Well, Michael Cremo wrote a huge book. I mean, he was extremely well versed in this subject, and it's like 3.5 inches thick, and it was extremely well documented in terms of describing case after case after case after case. And that book is, you know, is better than a zillion books that are used at the universities for coursework. but it's forbidden at the in the coursework. It's not used as a coursework for any university. Yet, because it shows anomalous evidence that the basic storyline taught in anthropology and archaeology is incorrect. But that type of a book with the level of detail and the level of documentation is sort of rare, and that's what we're dealing with subjects like remote viewing and extraterrestrial life. It's not that the findings are absent. It's that the recognition in mainstream is absent.
That is very true, Courtney.
Yeah. One of the things that I appreciate about the work that you guys do there at the Farsight Institute is that you do things as scientifically relevant as you possibly can get. Even though it is what people would consider to be like a woo-woo kind of a subject, to the mainstream thinking, to those of us who are, on the outside of things, we understand that these things really are real, that there is no doubt in our minds whatsoever that this stuff works. But the way that you do things and present things to people, I think, does a really good service, because you have presented them in these scientifically relevant ways as possible.
Yeah,
I definitely like that.
And we basically ignore the element of whether people are ready for it.
Yes.
So when I first came out with my first book, now I'm normally the chief investigator of these projects. I don't do the remote viewing for these projects. For this latest project, which just came out, which is on Mars, that was, the remote viewers for that are the two best remote viewers on the planet Earth right now. Dick Galgaier out in Hawaii using the Hawaii Remote Viewer Guild methods, and then Daz Smith, who's in Britain using CRV or controlled remote viewing. The HRVG or Hawaii Remote Viewing Guild methods that Dick Galgaier uses were taught to him by Glenn Wheaton, who came out of Special Forces Intelligence, and the CRV methods, controlled remote viewing, that are used by Daz Smith, those procedures came out of Defense Intelligence Agency in an official program. The HRVG procedures were not they didn't come out of an official program within the military. They came out of what was best described as a movement within the military that later became featured in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, starring Jeff Bridges and George Clooney. But the DIA procedures, which is an official program, that was housed in Fort Meade, Maryland, and those are the procedures that Daz Smith uses. And so the pedigree of these people that work on our projects, they have huge published track records of remote viewing in project after project, published in peer-reviewed outlets, respected peer-reviewed outlets, and all of which is available on our website at farsight.org, Farsight, like seeingfar.org, because we're a nonprofit. And this type of stuff is to die for. This type of stuff is really spectacular, but it doesn't mean that everyone in the world is jumping up and down because these results and these scientific studies have been done. It's a matter of people getting used to it. But we stopped worrying about what other people are ready for two reasons. A, it's taking people a long time, and B, we wanted to have fun. We wanted to do these things. We didn't want to die and not have done these things. So it's like saying a joke that somebody doesn't get, and you sort of say a joke and it's really funny. You laugh and your best friend laughs, but your other best friend doesn't laugh. It just says like, well, why are you combining this and that? It doesn't make sense. What do you hope to get out of that? And then you look at the person and you said, it was a joke, for gosh sakes. Don't you get it? You should be laughing. And nothing's wrong with the person. It's just that the person's mind may not be at the same spot where you're in.
Yeah, they don't have the point of reference, basically, that
exactly.
would acclimate them to that joke.
Exactly. So you can't do things in life based on your expectation of what other people are, how other people are going to react. For example, when I first came out with my first remote viewing book, that was when I first learned remote viewing myself, and I came up with a book on applied remote viewing, using it with regard to extraterrestrial life, and that was a bestseller in its day, and it's still available as a free PDF download from my personal website, which is CourtneyBrown.com, just my name.com. in the speculative nonfiction realm area. And that was called Cosmic Voyage. And when I came out with Cosmic Voyage, I remember my agent, I was so happy with it. The publisher was so happy with it. It was selling so great. And I talked to somebody who was in the military, who was a military guy doing the remote viewing stuff out of the defense, out of the DIA program. And I said, well, what'd you think? And the guy said, well, I think it was a really stupid book. I think, you put in way too much. People aren't ready for it. It's just, you give them inch by inch, you don't give them the kitchen sink, and you just don't throw it all there. I mean, it's just like really ridiculous. And I said, wow, talk about, well, talk about a bad landing. And so I just sort of learned then, well, you never really learn. Your feelings always get hurt. But the point is, the lesson is, you can't do things based on what you think other people are going to say, based on how you think they're going to respond. That book turned out to be the bestseller of remote viewing, and that was the thing that started the whole field in remote viewing, meaning people became interested in remote viewing because of that book. I mean, the guy was dead wrong in terms of the public reaction, but the point is that the guy was dead right in terms of where his mind was. And so
it's like the idea of the publishing company that did not publish the Beatles originally because they said no one would be interested in it. It was the same kind of thought.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean the Beatles should have not done what they've done. You don't take the Beatles and then have them look at the publishing company and say, well, what do you think we should do? We'll do what you should do, what you think we should do. I mean, by the way, it's not just the Beatles. I mean, that's
the same thing happened with George Lucas and Star Wars. They told him that that was a stupid idea.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, I use that in some of my classes at Emory to sort of tell people, to sort of bring to life the idea that you have to come up with new material if you constantly try to please people. Because my students at universities worldwide, not just my university, they're taught from high school to please. You're good Johnny, good Susie. Yep. You're supposed to please your parents. You're supposed to please your teachers. So they're trained to please. And when you leave college, if that's what you think life is all about, you're going to go into business or go into law and medicine. Your whole realm is going to be locked, like lockjaw, into trying to please people, having a happy customer. And the possibility of you actually doing something that is really thrilling in life, that you really enjoy, what happens to that? And so with George Lucas, imagine, in fact, when I teach my students, I use the George Lucas example. I say, imagine having George Lucas before Star Wars describe what his movie concept was. And he goes and he tells somebody, well, I've got this idea of, like these really crazy alien people with all types of weird, interesting costumes and stuff like that, like in a bar, singing on music and playing music. And this guy that's like this sort of jock type of guy comes in and he's flying this like space freighter that's hunted by the authorities, and like there's an evil empire, and the evil empire is chasing the good guys, and like they move things with their mind, with the Force. And that's exactly what did happen to him. People laughed at him until he completed his vision, and he made his movie, and people then saw it. And apparently, the very first version of the movie was like 3 hours long, and there was like a 15-minute standing ovation at the end of it. Now, but this also happens with like Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan, the singer, Bob Dylan. It wasn't just the Beatles and Lucas. When Bob Dylan was first starting out, he was trying to be like, his own version of a Woody Guthrie type personality, singing in this nasally tone with a harmonica and a guitar. And everybody who saw him said, this is just crazy, until John Hammond came along. And Hammond was the one, he was a music exec, said, this is the next base thing. Now, for the longest time, Bob Dylan, for like the whole year that Hammond was really sort of pressing and saying, this is really great, people in the industry called Bob Dylan, and this is an exact quote, they called him Hammond's folly, meaning they thought this was just Hammond's crazy idea that was the stupidest thing in the world. And Hammond just said, this is going to be good. And then Bob Dylan started to come out with his albums. And then was history. I mean, everybody then, and you never hear about these people afterwards. They never like fess up and say, "Yeah, I was a stupid jerk who thought it was going to be really ridiculous." They never. So when actually remote viewing becomes mainstream and the discussion of extraterrestrial life with respect to that becomes mainstream, you're never going to get these physicists coming back and saying, "Oh yeah, that was me. That was a roadblock and all that stuff."
We were wrong.
They're never going to fess up or anything like that. People just move on. And so with remote viewing and the discoveries that we have been made, they are where it's at right now. If people want to know what's happening, it's our public projects. That's the only venue that exists where these things are. And we don't really care that the mainstream science may be ignoring us, but I will say one thing. Nobody's laughing anymore. 20 years ago, 15 years ago, people were saying Courtney Brown is deluded, Farsight is just a joke, this is ridiculous. No one's doing that anymore. There's no public ridicule. Everyone's like in a waiting to exhale moment. They're like holding their breath. Because, you never bet against a smart guy who never backs down. And with regard to the stuff that we do, it's like one project after the next, after the next. And so these series of projects, right in the middle of doing the video for the second one, we've got 3 projects. Normally we don't touch the subject of extraterrestrial life because the remote viewers that I deal with, they're essentially prima donnas, and they're looking for sort of mainstream credibility, and they don't like the idea of combining remote viewing with extraterrestrial life because it's 2 esoteric topics together. They like dealing with just remote viewing by itself. But this is another situation where I don't take their expectations as my guidance in life. So, but nonetheless, for absolute years and years and years, I promise them I'll never give them extraterrestrial life type targets because, they don't like to do that. But that's a lie. I had to tell them that so that when I did extraterrestrial stuff, they would do it totally blind, meaning the remote viewing has to be done totally blind. They cannot know anything about the nature of the project or anything. And as soon as they pop themselves down on an extraterrestrial place, they're going to notice the gravity is different. They're going to notice the sun is different. They're going to notice it someplace else. So I had to convince them that it wasn't going to happen so that they wouldn't come to any conclusions, and they just keep on reporting what they perceive blind, having doubt in their conscious mind. That's the perfect way to do remote viewing, when the conscious mind is in total doubt. If the conscious mind comes to a conclusion, then you lose it. You lose the session, because then memory comes in and imagination comes in, and then the whole Star Wars stuff comes in. I mean, and it just, so the conscious mind has to be duped when that happens. And I did that same thing with our 9/11 project, when we did a project on the 9/11 events. Now, these remote viewers are so good that when they see these things, they see them in real high resolution. I knew the very first target I gave them, they'd see the Twin Towers come down, and they'd know what it was. So for years, I told them, and on radio, we'll never touch the 9/11 stuff. And I came up with reasons like, oh no, the military guys are on our board of directors, which is true. We know that we're not supposed to deal with stuff like that. That's too sensitive. We're not going anywhere near there. And they bought it hook, line, and sinker. So when I thought the time was right, that's the target I gave them. And that was a tough one, because there was like 7 targets or 7 things that they were supposed to perceive, one after the other, stretched over some months. They had to be kept in doubt throughout the entire time, and it worked like a charm. So, that's this type of, working with these prima donnas who are that good, it takes a lot of effort to be able to get this type of work out of them so that they can do this stuff. Now, every once in a while, you come up with somebody who says, okay, now you're a certified liar, because we've certified that you, in fact, have lied on the radio about what you're going to do in the future projects. Well, I say, well, give me a break. I mean, you asked me a stupid question to begin with. What are we going to do on our future project? So I told you the truth. I can't do that project. I mean, so what am I? Yeah, give me a break. You don't know anything about the remote viewing phenomenon if you asked the question in the first place. So, and then the second thing is, what I did is no different than what a director does. For example, some great directors, well, there was one case where Audrey Hepburn was working in a movie and wasn't getting the emotions out that she was supposed to be getting out. This is when she was relatively new, but the director knew she could do it. And so in front of other people, she wasn't getting tears. The real tears were not coming out. So in front of other people, the director just started yelling at her and, just telling her, this is awful, you're doing a lousy job. knowing full well that she was great, but he wanted to get her to cry. And he started, in front of other people, embarrassing her, and eventually tears started to come out, and she said, cut it. I mean, he said, all right, action, quick, now. And they got the tears.
I remember that story, yeah.
Yeah, and that they got the tears. It was realistic, and she won an Oscar.
Yeah, exactly.
She won, and that was the beginning of Audrey Hepburn as a big superstar when that happened. Now, are you supposed to? What are you supposed to say? The director should be fired because he, dragged her through an emotional loop. Well, it's the same thing with remote viewing. It doesn't work if the remote viewers have any idea whatsoever about what they're assigned to perceive. It's got to be done blind.
Courtney,
so I've got to do whatever I can possibly do to make sure that they're caught unaware.
Well, teach me a little bit about how this process works, and let the listeners know you're the one that makes the decision on what the target will be, and the two remote viewers that you're using, they know nothing of the target. They're going into this blind, and they're not even in contact with one another, correct? And yet in the
Absolutely.
videos,
In fact, they're on the opposite ends of the planet. Daz
Right.
Smith is in UK, and Dick Algar is in Hawaii, and they, during the project's data collection period, when they're doing the remote viewing, there's no connection, there's no communication between them. So they're not Skyping, they're not looking at each other, they're not even emailing each other. I mean, it's just dead.
and they're finding a lot of the same results as the other person.
These guys are so good. It's like carbon copies. These guys are so good that what one guy gets, the other guy gets. I mean, not like just a little bit overlap. I mean, it's like you can put one on top of the other. It's amazing stuff. But they also extend in different directions. So there are two types of remote viewing data. One is called verifiable, and verifiable data are stuff that you already know about the target. For example, the current project that we're talking about is about Mars, and that's the Cydonia region, the so-called face on Mars. Well, we've got some really good photographs of that supplied by NASA, and so we know what's there. We know it's a barren terrain. We know it's like a mountain. We know its diameter is, from corner to corner is about 3 kilometers. And we got some really good detail about the surface that we know the remote viewers have to get spot on. And that's what these remote viewers do. They get everything spot on. They get everything exact with regard to the verifiable stuff. Thus, we know about it. But then they start extending. I mean, they don't know what the limits are between verifiable and new data. So then they just start describing everything else that they see, and they fill in the entire backstory, stuff that you can't see in the photograph. So what our remote viewing projects always have is some major component that's verifiable so that you know they're describing the correct thing. And then it fills in with the rest of the story. Then those are the OMG moments when you're saying, oh my, so that's what's going on. And it fills in and everything makes sense. Now we know what the Cydonia so-called face on Mars was all about. We know how it ended. We know what's underneath the ground. We know the people that lived there, who built it, why they built it, what they were like. We know the whole backstory of that whole thing. But it all comes on the bedrock of knowing that the verifiable stuff, which is a huge element, is exactly correct. And Daz Smith and Dick Algar both got exactly the same verifiable stuff. And we're not talking about vague descriptions like wavy lines or a little dry here. We're talking spot on, very explicit, highly detailed descriptions of exactly what we know is at that target with respect to the picture. Really, totally unambiguous. That's what you get when you have these, better than military grade remote viewers. These are the best civilian remote viewers on the planet. So,
Ira and I both watched the Cydonia Mars video, and I watched the 9/11 one too the last time that we interviewed you, and it's really, really incredible stuff. I just thought that you might find this interesting. I got 2 emails in the past month before I contacted you asking me to talk about remote viewing, and somebody had sent me information for you, contact information. They said you should have Courtney Brown on your show. And I got another email a couple of days later from another listener who said the exact same thing. And I'm thinking, I remember Courtney Brown. I think I should contact him, get him on the show soon. And I was planning on doing it a little bit later, maybe in June or July of this year. And another guy contacted me who hosts, we co-host a radio show on Sundays together on a different topic, and he said, hey, how about this Sunday we talk about remote viewing? So I've got 3 different people all at the same time saying, let's talk about remote viewing. And at the same time, Courtney, I'm reading this book by a friend of mine who's written this 3-volume series about the idea of the evolution of man, where humans came from extraterrestrials. And he wrote a huge chapter on Mars, specifically talking about the Cydonia region on Mars. And then I contact you, you send me the information for your new video, I watched it, and you're talking about the same thing. For me, there's some type of synchronistic connection there, plus all of the technical issues I've had. This is the kind of proof for me that this information is very legitimate, and what you're doing is very on target with the truth of whatever you've uncovered in those remote viewing sessions about Cydonia on Mars. I don't know what you think about that.
I have to absolutely agree with Ryan on that as well. Yes, I feel that it's exactly the same way too.
Well, you know, in the beginning, the authorities, the military and so on, they were tasked with the intelligence groups. They were tasked, well, actually going back to the 1940s, they've been tasked with the issue of keeping this buttoned down, keeping this off the front pages, out of the mainstream. And typically that means entering and joining, disrupting UFO groups and things like that. And that typically means that when groups start to form, very often members will join who are supposed to be disruptive, and then they join and disrupt, and then other people stop participating because it's just a mess. And the whole idea is to keep these groups either small or inconsequential or highly disrupted. And that affected us in the beginning, in the 1990s, because that program, that element was still there. However, nothing like that is happening anymore. Nothing like that at all is going on with us. We are not being interfered with at all, technically, or with regard to personnel. So, and the big test for us was the 9/11 project, when we clearly showed remote viewing data in the huge project with 2 major documentaries, 2 movie documentaries that described all of the work, how the 9/11 thing was essentially an inside job, which some of your readers or listeners may be sort of rolling their eyes for, but they really have to see the data in order to understand it. And also the corroboration between the remote viewing data and the physical data, the anomalies on the ground, it was just absolutely perfect. And nothing is corroborated between the physical data on the ground, the anomalies, and the mainstream story about how the 9/11 thing actually happened. And so the so-called official story, some people call it the official conspiracy theory.
It really is an official conspiracy theory, and the people that promote it are truly paranoid more than people like us who ask questions.
Yeah, and so that was a real test for us to see when that was done, after the remote viewing was finished and the project and the targets were identified to the remote viewers, which were, again, Dick Algar and Daz Smith. Their first question was, are we going to be allowed to publish this? I mean, like, we explained exactly the whole thing, the whole backstory. Like in the past, we wouldn't have been allowed to publish it. Something would have happened to have disrupted. And I said to them, look, if we were going to be stopped, we would have been stopped before now, because we don't have any secrets with the military people. And so, they know everything we're doing, so we don't encrypt anything. We came out with that. And now the evidence, that by itself is, for people who know how intelligence people work, that is absolutely perfect evidence. I mean, you can say, if you can be as doubtful as you want, but if you know how military intelligence people work, evidence like that is absolutely 100% perfect in telling you that they're not disrupting us. And what that tells you is that with respect to the 9/11 stuff, but also with respect to the extraterrestrial life stuff, but let's stick with the 9/11 stuff just for a moment, that tells you that there's a huge fight going on, a war behind the scenes in the intelligence community itself. And that a huge chunk of the intelligence community is really, really royally ticked off that the 9/11 thing happened the way it did. And we're being allowed to hold it, meaning that we can't do what we do unless somebody's protecting us. I mean, I know that for an absolute fact. Whether you in the old days, I could say we were being disrupted by authorities, and people could say, "Oh, you're paranoid, a conspiracy nut, and deluded, and stuff like that." But now I'm saying the opposite. No, we're not being disrupted. So that's evidence that the authorities are okay with us coming out. Not all of the authorities,
just
but
some.
a good hefty chunk of them, ones with significant influence. Because I tell you, Ryan, Ira, nothing is happening to us. We are doing project after project after project. There is absolutely zero interference. And we're coming out, we have the highest quality video quality coming out with these projects. One thing after the next, no one's stopping us in terms of getting our information out to the public, in terms of new stuff. There's no internal intrigue. There's no people joining our group that are causing disruptions. None of that is happening. Our machines are not going down mysteriously. Look, let me tell you, this Skype conversation we're having right now, I know these military guys. They have capabilities that are way beyond anything you have ever fantasized about with respect to getting into computers or getting into buildings or getting into anything. There is no way to protect yourself from them. If your computer is on and not even connected to the internet, they have a way to get into the house and put something on that computer, and you will never know. I mean, but if it's connected to the internet, no matter what kind of anti-spywriting software you have, no matter what kind of antivirus software you have, no matter what kind of firewalls you have, it doesn't matter. They can get into it in a blink of an eye and do anything they want on that computer. So I'm telling you, so we have our policy is, well, let's not hide anything. We don't have any encryption going on. We have the standard stuff of, antivirus software and stuff but that doesn't bother them. And if they wanted to shut this conversation down, if they wanted to disrupt the machines, if they wanted to break into the house and take the machines out, it's a blink of an eye stuff. I mean, if they wanted the bank to end stuff, if they wanted me to be no longer a professor, I mean, it's a blink of an eye type of stuff. They can do that in a
Snap
second.
of the fingers.
They have very advanced capabilities for doing this type of thing. And anyone who says, "Oh, this is deluded, you can't do it," you're living in a fantasy realm. This is what these guys get paid. This is what these guys get paid to do. This is what their job is, to know how to do this stuff. And so if you're saying that they can't do this and that I'm living in a fantasy realm, you're saying that the U.S. military, which has a yearly budget that is bigger than all militaries of all other countries combined, added together, all at once, our military budget is bigger than that. And the biggest chunk of that, which is the hugest block of that, is black, meaning there is no accounting for it at all, meaning no one in Congress knows what it's spent on. There's no line item stuff. You're saying that all that money that is being spent on all that stuff that nobody has any accountability for is totally wasted. Well, what do you think they spend that money on? They if there's one thing that they're concerned about, it's getting information, being able to control things. And so when I tell you we're not being disrupted, that's very important piece of information. That means that a hefty chunk of those people are saying this is, they're humans like anyone else. They want the society to survive like anyone else. They see that they're invested in the future like anyone else. They have kids like anyone else. They want their kids to live in a better world. And they're allowing this stuff to happen now. So this is a really great time to be involved in remote viewing studies and to be involved in studies, especially connecting it with extraterrestrial life, because the way is cleared now. The way is cleared, and we can do our stuff. No one's disrupting. In fact, somebody out there must be fighting heavily behind the scenes to keep the road cleared before us. So that's why we're having this interview.
It's like they're giving tacit approval, basically, by them not doing anything. They're just saying,
Yes.
okay, well, you guys can
And
go ahead and release it, you know?
we're doing stuff by getting the information out that they're not allowed to do. For example,
Yeah.
military people, military intelligence people, they're employees of agencies. So they're not allowed to come out and say, all right, we're going to now talk to you about extraterrestrial life and past civilizations on Mars and on Earth and things like that. They're not allowed to do stuff like that. The discovery of extraterrestrial life, the UFO phenomenon, the past civilizations on Mars, stuff like that, that has never been a scientific issue. People always say, oh, no, we have SETI, we're trying to discover signals from radio signals. Look, that's all a joke. Nothing has ever been a scientific issue with regard to any of that stuff. It's always been a political issue. It's always politics that drives it. No scientist is going to be allowed, no mainstream, money gathering and money collecting federal budget item agency such as NASA or SETI. Nobody is going to be allowed to publish their results and to say, we've discovered extraterrestrial life, and to make it certified, accepted, mainstream, without the political decision that it's time to do it. It's always been a political decision. It's never been a scientific decision.
That's right. That's actually something that we talked about a couple of days ago. I remember we were speaking with Eric Dollard, the free energy guy, and he was saying the same thing, that he doesn't get as much interference as much as he actually gets almost promoted in a sense by some of these agencies to talk about what he's talking about, to put out that information about free energy. And I think, Courtney, you're saying the exact same thing when it comes to remote viewing. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll come back. I wanted to get into a little bit about what you guys found in those remote viewing sessions for Cydonia on Mars, if that sounds good to you.
Sounds great.
Courtney Brown, our guest today, the director of the Farsight Institute.
And help the Fox Mulder get to, to have leads to go after these things. And that's basically what you're dealing with. You're dealing with a very multifaceted organization. The government is huge. And there's people on both sides. The people who wanted to crush the X-Files and Fox Mulder's and Scully's attempts to find out the truth, and other people who wanted to bring light. They knew that there had to be a balance between bringing the information out and suppressing the information. That just bringing the information out all by itself without some type of resistance is unrealistic. On the other hand, if you constantly have the resistance, you have the crushing of a civilization. You have the totalitarian control of a civilization, and that lack of freedom is huge with respect to the implications it has on our future. So, that's what we're really dealing with. So when we say that there are people protecting us, it's just sort of the norm. By the way, you should understand that everything coming out of Hollywood that deals with the intelligence community, the military, everything is vetted. Everything goes through a process where they approve, and they change the scripts. They do so. The X-Files could not have been done without that. No. Now there are probably people in your audience saying, "How does he know that?" But it's not a secret. We actually we know the names of the people who actually do the vetting. It's not a government secret that these people, after they retire, they become public. And the main guy who did the vetting for every single Hollywood TV show and blockbuster movie over the past 25 years retired, actually 26 years, because he retired about 3 years ago. After that, he came out with a book that was officially sanctioned by the government, and he went on talk radio describing his activities and what he did and the whole thing. So, and nobody in the media challenged that. It was
I remember seeing that in the media, and he was talking to reporters, and they were talking about how if the military, for example, relinquishes, a military ship or a helicopter or military equipment to be used in a movie, the Pentagon has to approve that script before they're able to have access to that technology.
Yeah, that is now no longer in dispute.
Well, you take an example of the movie Mission to Mars, which had complete input from NASA along with it. And the thought that I had when I was watching that movie, for instance, was, well, this was done in collaboration with NASA in a lot of different ways. How much of this type of thing actually was a reality? You see?
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So anyway, so that type of stuff is the reality of sort of what goes on, and but and again, these people who do the vetting, they're not public when they do the vetting. They work for the intelligence community, and they're not public when they do it. But when it's over, it has become known, and it has become known in a major, officially sanctioned way, with radio interviews and so on, and it's not disputed in the military. I mean, it's not disputed in the media that this in fact was their job. So the X-Files was an officially sanctioned show, meaning there were people that actually wanted that story to come out as it came out. It gave a lot of insight into the inner workings of the intelligence community. Well, the stuff that we're dealing with right now was like that. So let's now to the Cydonia thing. Now, the big website to go to, since a lot of people can have difficulty remembering all the websites, the big one to go to is farsight.org, Farsight, like seeing far.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. That's the go-to place to start. And the big banner right on the top is the remote viewing Cydonia Mars, which is our recent thing. If I can give one plug, though, that's very important. We are a nonprofit, and we do not have a way to tell people what we are doing. So, by advertising, we don't buy advertisements, any advertisements. So, if you could click on the top link in the navigation bar that says subscribe to our free newsletter, we never give out the email addresses to anyone, ever, period. Ever. And we have a weekly newsletter that comes out that even has a comic, a pretty well received comic these days. It's always had a comic. It's a nice newsletter to get once a week, and there's no it doesn't have like advertising on it or anything. So it's the only way we have to tell people what we're doing. So if you can just put your email address in there, there's no spam because we never give out the email addresses. And it's just a once-a-week newsletter, and that's the only way we have to let you know what we're doing. Anyway, if you click on the Cydonia Mars thing, you can actually see the NASA photographs that this is about. Now, when the photographs originally came out from the Viking space probes, that did sort of look like a face. But when it got a little closer, there was questions about whether NASA was playing with the light, whether they were trying to cover up facial characteristics. Well, people can still debate whether it's a face or not, but I was never in the face ballpark. I mean, it's because it's 3 kilometers from corner to corner, 3 kilometers big. That's huge. I mean, if you think of a political decision to build something, why in the world are you going to build a face pointing up towards the sky? You're going to be thinking about things that would get your followers to support you while you were in power. And having something pointing up to the sky that's that big, that's not like the Washington Monument. That's not like the Lincoln Memorial. I mean, things that people can see that can get you, adoration, establish some type of mystique about you. So this idea of a face pointing up, I just never bought into it. Although I'm not saying it wasn't that, but we have no evidence that it is that. But what was really going on with it was all of the circus about the face. And then when NASA, by the way, which was completely ignored by mainstream media, and then when NASA came out with the Mariner photos that were higher resolution, actually they were the Mars observer photos and things, the orbiter and so on. When they came out with the later photos of it, and they said, "See, it's not a face," mainstream media did publish that. They put it all over the place, and so when that happened, everyone was breathing a sigh of relief, saying, "Oh my gosh, at least, thanks goodness, there's no face. See, there's no face." So they put that all over the place, and it was just like a magician, because what happens is a magician will do something with the right hand to distract you so that you're not looking at what the left hand is doing. So by having this photograph come out saying, look, it's not a face, it's not a face, it's not a face, what they were doing is getting everybody to focus on whether there was a face, and what they were really doing was getting everybody to not notice that there were perfect parallel and perpendicular lines on the photograph, plus a perfect corner that was a better corner than you have in any of your rooms in your house, plus a perfect semicircle on the other end, meaning it had a perimeter, and it was clearly artificial. No erosion process makes perfectly parallel and perfectly perpendicular lines, plus a semicircle. So that was what really keyed me. I saw that. I said, I'm not even thinking about the face, but those lines are, absolute evidence of civilization activity. Somebody built something there. So I was always wondering about what it was. I never bought into the idea of the face, but I had no idea what it really was. So finally, I had an opportunity where these remote viewers were convinced we'd never do something about extraterrestrial life. And I said, now's the time to do it. They seemed as convinced as they're ever going to be convinced. So I said, so I threw it at them at that moment. And I actually threw it in with a bunch of other targets, one for Iapetus and the other on the Phoenix Lights. We're working on the Iapetus video now, and the Phoenix Lights one will come out after that. So the Iapetus video will actually come out in about 3 weeks. Phoenix Lights will come out sometime during the summer. We know the complete backstory on all of these things. And so I put them all into one project because I knew the remote viewers might be a little ticked off that I tricked them. So I said, I better get it now while I have a chance. So we're calling this 3-part thing, the remote viewing the aliens, and the Cydonia thing is the first part. And what we found about the civilization on Mars was absolutely fascinating. Anyway, we have its own video for that now. This is a video remote viewing session. I'm a video remote viewing project. In the old days, the military guys did remote viewing using paper and pen, and talk about something that was boring to watch. I mean, that's how we all learned remote viewing, the old paper and pen way. And that was good for like photocopying papers and shuffling them around in the intelligence community and so on. But like nobody really wanted to watch that stuff. It was like you had to be a real aficionado, a real dedicated groupie of remote viewing stuff in order to want to see it. So we had to change things. So we got the guys to do remote viewing. Dick Algar was the one who really pioneered this, to do remote viewing using a whiteboard, standing up in a theatrically interesting manner. Now, Dick Algar was a professional newscaster in Hawaii. He was the guy on the news. He was the face of the news in Hawaii for 30 years. And so he was used to being on camera more than he's used to being off camera. So it was natural for him to say, well, I do this. I'm used to talking standing up and telling people things. Why should I be sitting on a desk and doing this thing with a paper and pen? So he was the one who started it. I was very doubtful. Daz Smith thought it was not such a good idea. But it turned out to be great. And so we did that with one remote viewing session in an early project called the Atlantis Project. And it turned out to be great. Then when we did the next project, which was the Great Pyramid of Giza, we decided to make that a remote viewing project with video that had both video and paper and pen. But it was a hefty amount of it. Most of it was on video. That turned out to be really great. And then we said, okay, let's drop the paper and pen completely. So our 9/11 project was totally on video. And that was unbelievable. And then, now we do our projects on video where people are actually watching the stuff come in live. It's not like it's recorded live. And so there's tension when you watch this because you know what the targets are. You know what the things are that they're supposed to be describing. But it's obviously when you're watching the video that they don't know consciously what's going on. But their descriptions are so spot on. You're like on the edge of your seat ready to fall off, because you see how good they really are. And nobody has ever complained that there was a boring minute in any of the video that we have on these things. Anyway, so the new video on Cydonia Mars explains a lot about what that civilization was. We know the whole backstory.
And can you give us a little bit of detail about that, maybe without, expressing too much from the video? What was there?
I don't mind telling you because you're going to want to see it anyway because of the ability to see the remote viewing sessions done live.
It's so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear it from somebody talking about it, but the big impact doesn't come till you watch it with your own eyes. What basically it is humans, when you're remote viewing another human, in general, this is the basic truism, other humans cannot tell if you're remote viewing them. Meaning, you can remote view somebody on another. You can have remote viewers in the United States, remote viewing terrorists, or remote viewing from someone back in the Soviet Union days and the Kremlin walls or something like that. And those guys won't know that you're remote viewing them. But when you do remote view extraterrestrials, very often the extraterrestrials in spaceships and things like that, they actually know you're coming. And when the remote viewers go there, we have lots of situations where they report right away that they're in this type of a thing. There's lights all over the place. The people look strange, and that they're all looking at them.
So they're very aware of the remote viewers.
They're very
presence.
aware, but that never happens with humans. So when we were remote viewing Mars, I was actually interested in to see what would actually happen. And we don't have a single instance where any of the Martians turned around and looked at a remote viewer, meaning they were just like us. In fact, I like to call it they were us when we were there. It was obviously in our very distant past, and they looked like us, they acted like us, they had a civilization like us. Now, the Cydonia region was actually like an island city. It was surrounded by water. And you can see that just from the picture. You can see that it's elevated in that perimeter that has two perfect parallel lines and a perfect perpendicular line and a perfect semicircle. That was like a wall that surrounded the entire thing. So it probably protected them from waves and other things, weathering stuff. But it was a perimeter to the whole thing. And it was like a city. It was a place where people were. And they had society there that was complex. They had the elite, just like we have the elite. They had the religious leaders that had fanatical followers. They had rich people, middle-class people, poor people. They had a shantytown type area. And they had the whole mix. I mean, other than the fact that it was on Mars, you wouldn't have noticed much of a difference between them and us in any major sort of urban type area.
What was the time difference in terms of how long ago did this take place? Was this a couple thousand years ago or a couple million years?
This is really in the distant past. Basically, what happened is the Cydonia region bit the dust because of a planetary catastrophe. It didn't just whimper away. There was a cataclysm of some type. And we've studied this in some of our other projects. So I'm connecting the dots now between our other projects and this. Basically what happened is that where the asteroid belt is now, there used to be a planet, and that planet exploded. Now, the exact reasons for why it exploded, we don't know exactly, but it could have been an act of war or whatever. But there was a planet there that exploded. Now, for those of your listeners who are rolling their eyeballs now, and let me just say, hold on just a little bit.
Not here at this show, I'll tell you that.
Just bear with it a little bit longer. The idea that there was a planet there that was exploded was actually the original idea behind the asteroid belt. And that was challenged, and then what became the orthodoxy was that the asteroid belt was what was leftover garbage from the forming of the solar system from the primordial solar nebula. But there was not a shred of evidence supporting that. Nonetheless, it was easier to think of that than it was to think of a planet exploding. So that became sort of the dominant view of that. Now, a mainstream astronomer named Thomas Van Flandern, who was head of his Department of Celestial Mechanics at the Naval Observatory, who was extremely well published and very mainstream, he assembled an enormous collection of planetary data that was absolutely unambiguous, that nailed it solid. There was a planet there. For whatever reason, it exploded, and that's how the asteroid belt came about. And for those people who sort of might be doubting, how could this be? Just put two and two together. The asteroids are big, solid rocks, for heaven's sake. Some of them are big, like the Ceres asteroid. I mean, they're huge things. You can't get big, solid rocks forming out of the primordial solar nebula. They need a gravity well they have to be compressed in order to make really hard rocks. So there has to be a big solid something that sort of sucks them all in and compresses them into rocks. In addition, the asteroids themselves have enormous evidence of having been exposed to extreme searing heat that melted the surface of them. So those asteroids aren't just from the primordials. If they were primordial solar nebula stuff, they'd be like collections of dust that are just sort of clobbed together. They're not. They're solid rocks with metals in them and all types of stuff. And so, just on that alone. So we do have an idea of when this planet exploded. And apparently we're talking like 10 million years ago. So anyway, the evidence does seem to suggest, now we can't say this confirmatively, but it does seem to suggest that Mars was a moon of that planet. When it exploded, Mars was nearby. And so when Mars was nearby, you had a situation where the planet exploded and basically hit Mars with like a shotgun blast of stuff. Now, one half of Mars is heavily cratered, and that same half of Mars is thick, meaning its crust is like a kilometer up to 3 kilometers thicker than the other half of Mars. So the cratered side is both thicker and more cratered. Actually, and the other side has no craters on it. So whatever hit Mars hit it from one side and one side only. Now that's what happened to end the prime time of Martian civilization, meaning there were tidal waves, there was enormous cataclysms, and that inundated the Cydonia region. And that's what happened. You see, underneath the face on Mars, they had tunnels, and those tunnels led to subway systems. And we have really good photographs, NASA supplied photographs of subway systems, of these tunnels.
Is this one of the glass tubular tunnel systems that I think it was Dick Allgaier was drawing?
We have it in the in the documentary. We have the pictures of the tunnels and his descriptions of these tunnels. And they were, Mars' atmosphere was always thinner than Earth, so pushing things around with airplanes may not have been so easy or so normal for transportation. It was very easy to build subway systems, relatively speaking. So, our atmosphere on the surface of Earth is really thick. Just stick your hand out of the window when you're driving the car. It's really thick. So flying things was a natural process. But in Mars, they had a subway system, and the trains that were used were like the maglev trains that we use on Earth on steroids. They were really fast. And so that was a dominant way to get around on Mars. And so, and Dick Allgaier describes that in explicit detail by going under the so-called face and just following it. But Daz Smith also found these underground tunnels and chambers under the face on Mars as well. But Dick Allgaier was really one who went into the train system and how it was powered and the whole thing. And so, and we have really good, some of these tunnels have been exposed due to erosion on the surface of Mars. So now NASA has really good pictures of these tunnels. So but basically what happened is everything was inundated when that explosion occurred, and the tidal waves and the issue of there being huge oceans covering much of Mars's surface is not in dispute anymore. Then it happened for at least hundreds of millions of years. NASA is now willing to say. That's just relatively recent. Within the last couple months, they're willing to say that. So,
if this happened within millions and millions of years, the remnants of whatever had existed there previous, Courtney, was this a technologically advanced society?
Yes.
Far more in advance of us today, or is it similar to our 21st century tech?
It's more advanced than what we are today. They had some elements of technology that were more advanced, and their train system was more advanced than we have now. Their methods of powering the train system was more advanced. And based on what we have with the Iapetus project, it does seem to suggest, if you connect those two, which is hard for me to do now because the Iapetus thing isn't out yet, but when that does come out, you'll see if we connect the two, it looks like the people back in those days had spacefaring capabilities that were far in advance of what we have today with rockets. But nonetheless, what basically did happen in the society is that they had a mix of people. No matter how advanced the technology is, it doesn't mean that society is without problems. So they had their worker class, their peasant class, their poor people. They had their middle class and everything else, just like we have today. So I like to say they were us when we were there. And so what happened was that event happened on Mars. It was a bad day. And I'm sure a zillion people died. But that was not the end of Martian civilization. That was not the end. You know, it's like what Jeff Goldblum says in Jurassic Park movies, nature finds a way. Society rebuilt itself. And we know that because in the not too distant past, within like say 1 million years or, you know, relatively recently, there was a fission nuclear surface explosion on Mars. And that, among people who are willing to look at the data and acknowledge what they're seeing, is absolutely not in dispute. There's a book out. There's actually been a couple books out, but the most recent book came out in March of this year by John Brandenburg called Death on Mars. Details the nuclear forensic evidence in terms of radioisotope readings, including, you know, usually focusing on the xenon readings. They exactly match that of a fission nuclear reactor, a fission nuclear explosion on the surface. The characteristics, the signature characteristics are perfect, and that level of nuclear forensics can't be cheated. And they know where the bomb went off. They know its impact on the antipode, which is the exact opposite spot of the planet where it happened. And that's what finally did it with the Martian atmosphere. So when the other planet nearby exploded, that was a bad day, and I'm certain Mars wasn't such a happy place to live on for a long while. But that didn't end it. What finally ended it was the nuclear explosion that blew off the rest of the atmosphere. And what we have on Mars today is a result of that.
Do we find any evidence in these remote viewing situations where we have an idea of kind of what led to the advancements or the evolution, if you will, of humanity? I mean, what you're talking about is very spot on with a lot of research that I've read into, with the video that I watched of yours. A lot of things kind of coming together for me right now and over the past couple of months, my research into this subject. And another topic that Ira and I had been talking about in the past couple of weeks was evidence of nuclear explosions here on Earth dating back couple of 100,000, maybe a couple million years, vitrified sand out in the desert near the areas of Mesopotamia around the Fertile Crescent. And we have evidence and proof of that here on Earth. Is there any evidence that whatever existed there came here to Earth and we are either an evolutionary step backwards from them, or perhaps we were engineered from their scientific programs? Do you have any evidence or any clues into any of that?
Well, in terms of evolutionary status, I will say, in my opinion, we are the most, or one of the most advanced species in the galaxy in terms of evolutionary status. And the reason I'm willing to say that is I'm not saying that our technology is more advanced. There are clearly extraterrestrial civilizations that have greater levels of technology. And it's not saying that our civilization has become more advanced than others. We're still sort of primitive in our own ways. But ourselves, our human nature, our characteristics, we're on the absolute cutting edge of the development of consciousness. And the reason is we as humans think of ourselves as very isolated individuals. Ryan, you're Ryan. Ira, you're Ira. Courtney, I'm Courtney. We're really separated, and we don't have a very clear telepathic connection between everybody else, ourselves. We think of ourselves as isolated individuals, and we like to take hikes out in the woods all by ourselves so we can experience the loneliness. We like to travel across the country in a car all by ourselves so we can experience the exploration. Back in the old Wild West days, we would have people going out and exploring, the lonely wanderers. We love solitary walks on the beach. We love interacting with a new lover, making love with that special person, discovering the personality, as individuals, bringing something to us. as so that we can grow as an individual. That apparently is very different from almost everything else that goes on in the galaxy. And most species out there have a much closer bonding. They live more connected telepathically. They communicate normally telepathically, meaning all those boundaries are not there. So what you can say is some species have actually referred to us, humans, as the masters of limitations. And so what we are is a species that is refining the idea of being cut off from everything else. And it is blankety blank scary to a lot of other people in the galaxy. So when I say we're advanced, I'm saying like we are on the cutting edge of isolating ourselves from everybody else. And it's very much like the guy who goes to the edge of the bridge, ties a rope around his ankle and then jumps off. And you say, my gosh, he's bungee jumping and he's bouncing around and there's nothing holding him from complete obliteration other than a rope that's tied to his ankle as he's bouncing and bouncing up and down connected to the bridge. Well, that's the way the rest of the galaxy looks at us. It's like, how in the world did they do that? I mean, it's so scary. And so a lot of other people are saying, how far can you push this concept of isolation? So no, we don't have a technologically advanced society that's equivalent to many extraterrestrials. The level of grandeur that they have in those societies may be, dwarfing us. But when they look at us, they're jaw drops. They're jaw drops. They look at like, oh my God, how could they do that? That's so scary, such an adventure. And so when you think of the Martians, you say, okay, well, here they are, Martians. The whole civilization went belly up. Now you think about it. Remote viewing, if it does anything, it clearly demonstrates that we're more than our physical body. So that when the physical body dies off, what are we going to do? So now there's two ways you can get here. You can get here in the few that could have escaped on ships, but you're talking small numbers. And then you're talking about, dying, and then you're saying afterwards, without a body, you're saying, well, where am I going to go next? What would be the most logical place? Are you going to skip galaxies? Or are you going to go to another solar system? What you do is say, well, what's nearby? And so it's very likely that a great number of humans that are here on the planet are, in fact, former Martians that decided to come here. And so you can assume that our society reflects what Martian society was like because we're the same people. You can assume that that is true. Now, we don't have direct remote viewing evidence of that, but it makes sense. Where would they go? They're going to come here. So this planet is a nearby place.
Kind of like a refugee camp almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, in fact, looking at this planet as a refugee planet is a very useful analogy because this planet is a very unfavorable planet to live on in terms of a long-term civilization. It's very unstable. And so anybody who would normally come here would do so only under duress. For example, this planet is an 8,000-mile diameter ball of liquid molten rock. It's a lake of liquid molten rock. And it's covered by an 8-mile thin crust. And everything that lives on it is living on this crust. I'm floating on an ocean of liquid rock. Now you can say, yeah, but it looks stable. Yeah, it's all right. It is stable for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 4,000 years, 20,000 years. But eventually the sun will burp in our direction with a coronal mass ejection. And when it does, it'll cause ripples in the liquid below, and the crust will crinkle and do all types of stuff, meaning it is not possible for a planetary civilization excuse me, to last here very long before the civilization crumbles and we have to start all over again. Now, this was actually detailed, the sort of history of this, in yet another book, this one written by an academic at Boston University named Robert Schoch. That's S-C-H-O-C-H, and he's a tenured professor at Boston University, and he's written a number of books, but one of them, a recent one, is called Forgotten Civilization, The Role of Solar Outbursts in Our Past and Future. And that's a very useful book because it describes a great many archaeological anomalies that clearly indicate that we didn't start our civilization 3,000 years ago. For example, the Göbekli Tepe archaeological finds, which are relatively recent, but they're extraordinary, extensive, a few hundred acres of buildings that were at least as advanced as the Great Pyramid type stuff. They were all buried. They were purposely buried by the builders as if they were trying to protect their civilization from something that was raining down on them from the sky. And to actually have constructed those things and to have basically buried a whole city, but not buried it to get rid of it, buried it to live under, that took an enormous amount of effort. Clearly, they were trying to protect themselves from something. You also get other anomalies that were discussed by in Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology. That's Michael Cremo's book, where you clearly have evidence of advanced civilization in the past that made things made things out of metal and so on. And then we have a project that we did at Farsight Institute called the Atlantis Project, and the Atlantis Project is a very clear description of an ancient civilization, only 70,000 years ago, ancient, so we're not talking long, that lived on Earth, that was technologically more advanced than us by about a year, by about 100 years, They were very close. And they destroyed themselves, leaving really great ruins, really great evidence of the civilization that are buried under the ocean. But we have really good Google Earth imagery of this, sonar imagery of the ruins, say 1,000 miles west of Morocco, Portugal, 3 miles deep of the city, and also down near Antarctica. And we did a remote viewing project on those particular spots and discovered the whole thing. They had a very advanced civilization, again, about 100 years more advanced than us. And they had a secret science project where they were digging with like boreholes out near Australia, New Zealand area. And they were trying to drill through the crust to get at the heat below, and they thought they'd be able to contain it. It was just a super big mistake. They popped the balloon. They had a major blowout. I mean, you're talking a blowout like a quarter. It was a huge blowout, bigger than any nuclear bomb type thing that you could ever imagine, on that whole corner. And that spot out near New Zealand has the thinnest crust on the planet. It also has the largest concentration of volcanic rock. Anyway, so what happened was, with that blowout, you also get a dent. And the dent always happens in the antipode, which is the exact opposite spot of the planet, which is exactly where the civilization evidence is on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So Europe didn't used to end at Portugal. Europe actually extended at least 1,000 miles further west. And that whole area went down when the blowout occurred down near New Zealand. So that's the kind of planet we live on. So this is not the planet of first choice. This is a planet of last resort because there's so much volatility associated with it, both stuff that we do to it, but also stuff that's natural to it. But what you can say about this planet is it's a perfect planet for a biological and zoological garden, a place to grow animals and plants. I mean, this is where it's supposed to be. But for a long-term civilization, it's hell. And so and we also have really severe weather, hurricanes, the atmosphere is thick, the gravity is heavy, got all types of problems. But nonetheless, and again, there are no serious problems over 1,000 years, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years. It's okay. But when you stand out like 20,000 years, something is going to happen that's going to, boil us down. And again, Robert Schoch's book, Forgotten Civilization, details a lot of this stuff.
It's the long-term effects that lead to
It's the long-term effects. So you just don't look around and say everything looks stable today. I mean, that's ridiculous. The long-term effects is what you look for. And a civilization needs long-term stuff. So when the Martians came here, a few of them probably came in ships. The rest of them died there and just got born here. That was sort of the natural way to do things. And we are the way we are. If you want to know what Martians are like, look at the way we are. We're the same people.
So, Courtney, we have one quick listener question for you from
go ahead.
From Mike, and then in the ending of this question, if you could answer that, and then go ahead and if you want, take a minute or two to give out your websites again and any additional information that you would like to let the listeners know about. So, Ira, I think you have the question.
Basically the question is it possible through remote viewing is it possible to do things like maybe remote viewing God? Is that a possibility? And then a second, maybe sort of tied in kind of question is remote viewing something that anybody can do? Can anybody be trained to do it? So I guess
let me start with the second question first. The answer is yes. There is some natural talent associated with it. Being an artist is actually very good, meaning if you can draw, that's good, because anyone can perceive anything, but you have to be able to describe what you're perceiving. However, let me say that it is very simple to start, because if you go to our website, farsight.org, to www.farsight.org, and if you go to the SRV, that's S like in Sierra Romeo Victor section for instruction, you'll see a complete course in remote viewing. We're talking video lessons, and all free video lessons, as well as there's a 18-hour 24-lesson audio course that's for free, plus there's video lessons for free. There's a free printable text and all of that stuff, and just about everybody who learns remote viewing starts there. And then so yes, anybody can do this, but it's like anything else. You can have some great experiences yourself. If you want to get really good at it, you're talking like, learning how to play the piano. You have to work at it. But now the second question was, what was the second question? I forgot.
Can you remote view? Go ahead, Ira.
Oh, God, the God question. Yes, actually, I was actually given that target myself a while, in my early days. You can remote view God, but you have to be able to understand what you're going to get. Now, and I can give the best way to answer that question is my own personal experience doing that. What I found when that was given to me as a blind target, I found a civilization, and there were two different times when I had that type of a target. The one time was I found a civilization, and the civilization was advancing and learning and just growing by itself. And I went through like a whole series of experiences about what that civilization was like at its various stages. And my interpretation of that was that we are God, meaning there is no separation between us and God. God is living us through us. So we are the same thing. And so, God is learning what it feels like to be Ira by having Ira. I mean, Ira is not different from God. And the same thing with Ryan. Ryan is not different from God. There is a God. God is simply saying, I wonder what it would be like to be Ryan. So that's who you are. And so a whole civilization is like that. Now, at the other time that I had an experience like that, where that was a target, these are extreme sort of esoteric type targets, but occasionally they happen. And when those happen, what I got was a sense of a being who was solitary and incredibly in pain and anguish. It was not a physical being, but it was like a globular thing. And to end its solitary nature, it was conflicted within itself. And to end its solitary nature, it let itself break apart into pieces so it could communicate with itself and have the individual personalities within it. And so it exploded. It simply it exploded itself. And that was the birth of existence. That was the birth of the universe. And the sense was that if that being had not fulfilled itself, if that being had not let itself explode, creating all exists, then it would have gone mad. It was not a happy situation. It was the level of depth of penetration, of the pain of isolation was beyond anything that we could ever imagine. And it was a solution. And with the explosion, which the birth of life, it was a released level of joy beyond anything imaginable. It had grown, it had given birth, it had become existence. And when that means that when you experience life and you experience something that is literally God not sort of watching you do it, that is God literally experiencing it. So when you experience something that's really thrilling, that is literally God experiencing something thrilling. That also means that God can be shocked by things that happen, like when the Holocaust happened. As we look at it and say, how could we have done such a thing? I mean, this is great. That means that's God saying, how could that have happened? How could I have, that's me who did that? So and when you make love to your significant other, that joy is not being watched by God. That is God experiencing that. That's what it means. And so, can you remote view God? Yeah, but what you get back, you have to be flexible enough to be able to try to figure it out.
Try to interpret it.
Yeah. So anyway, the bottom line is, for those people who want more, go to farsight.org. That's the main website you want to start with. And first thing, for heaven's sake, click on the subscribe to the free newsletter. We never give the email addresses out for any reason whatsoever, and that's the only way we have to communicate with people, to let people know what we're doing, by sending out our weekly newsletter, which has a comic, and you're going to want to see the comic. It has a great comic. A lot of people get the newsletter just to get the comic. And so it's a really great comic in terms of, I do it. I mean, previously, Vic Guiza, a celebrated cartoonist in Mexico, did it. But it's an interesting style of comics. A lot of people, it's become quite popular. Anyway, so get the free newsletter, and then click on there's a ton of free stuff. Almost the entire website is free. But click on all the free stuff, and then also click on some of the project. Watch the trailers for the big video documentaries. Some of the video documentaries we have to release through Vimeo as video on demand or DVDs on Amazon, because they're long, they're big video type movie things, and that was the only venue that was available for us. But all the shorter ones and stuff like that, including web series, we even have a science fiction web series out. Those are all free, and all the instructional stuff is free, and a lot of other stuff you'll see when you just go. But basically, sign up for the newsletter, and then click on the big Cydonia banner and the top, so you get a head start into where the main project is that we've been talking about today.
Well, Courtney Brown, thank you very much for joining us on The Secret Teachings, and Ira as well. Thank you for coming on this conversation and talking with us for a little bit. I really had a great time. I'd love to have you back on the show sometime in the future, Courtney. Really, really, really insightful stuff. And again, the listeners, go check out farsight.org. That's Farsight, farsight.org. I'll keep it linked up at thesecretteachings.info as well. Courtney, if you could stay with us for just one moment off air so we could talk to you.
Sure.
Other than that,
I want to say thank you so much for inviting me on the show, and I'll be glad to come back.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. And Ira, do you have any last comments?
The concepts that you were giving there of God were just amazing. Definitely look into doing remote viewing. I've experimented with it myself. If I can do it, anybody can do it.
Well, thank you guys very much. Courtney, we'll speak to you here in just a few minutes. And again, we'll love to have you back on The Secret Teachings. Our
really big time books that have come out recently, such as Forbidden Archaeology. That is a book. Let me see. The best way to think about the Forbidden Archaeology thing is, the author is Michael Cremo, Cremo. But the best way to think about it is that he's not a professional PhD archaeologist, but he was someone who was, like you and I, extremely wondering about why archaeology is not taking into account all of these deep findings of things that are anomalous, things that are literally buried in the ground that people dig up but that don't fit with the strata. And so he's an extremely intelligent man, and he wrote a book that is way better than a zillion books published by PhDs in any type of field, called Forbidden Archaeology. That was
Are you guys still there?
I am. I think we lost him.
I think we did too. Let me see if I can reconnect here. Now
again, the funny timing of the subjects that get talked about. You see,
that's how it always works. Courtney, are you still with us? Yeah. Now my computer's all messed up here. I'm telling you what, Ira, this is not. I'm not making this up. There's something weird. This happens every single time we do something like this. My Skype
it sure does.
My Skype just completely shut off on me, and my internet just restarted itself.
Oh, good God.
So I'm not sure what that is. I think Courtney's calling us back right now. Let's go ahead and accept this.
Okay.
And it just kicked him off again. I'll tell you what, man. This is like, you know, you people that are doing this. Do you have to make it this blatant? Really? Come on.
Yeah, I just saw in his message he said that he is here.
Okay.
Yeah, there you are.
I can
there
hear
you.
you.
Are.
My internet
Yeah.
just restarted and my Skype turned off completely on me when we started talking about the forbidden archaeology.
Oh, okay.
Every time certain subjects come up, man, it always ends up happening.
But go ahead.
Are we on now?
Yeah, we're still on. Just go ahead and you were talking about the forbidden archaeology, Michael Cremo's book. If you wanted to go ahead and finish up what your comments were about that.
Sure. Well, Michael Cremo wrote a huge book. I mean, he was extremely well versed in this subject, and it's like 3.5 inches peripheral in the physics realm right now. They were originally developed by a physicist named Hugh Everett, who got his PhD under John Wheeler at Princeton, and his dissertation in 1957 was widely laughed at and scoffed at in his day, but he was the one who came up with the idea of the other worlds or parallel universes because of a frequency-based interpretation of the universe. And everyone said, no, we're solid. Everything's here. I mean, I see you, you see me. We're obviously pieces of rock, that type of stuff. And it was Hugh Everett that said, no, there's no such thing as that. All you have is frequencies. And that gave birth to the other worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. And currently, I understand it's approximately 18% of mainstream physicists now adopt the other world interpretation of quantum mechanics as being correct, which means that 82% are still stuck with the old Copenhagen model, which basically means that those ones are older and we're waiting for them to retire and die off and replaced by the other world's, new guys.
By this younger generation that's coming about.
That's exactly right, and it takes time. But the old standard model of quantum mechanics and the relativistic ideas that there's only a single version of us and we're solid in a solid universe, and thus there cannot be any other universes, and we must obey the laws of relativity. You cannot send information backward and forward in time, perceptions or things or anything else. Those things are just as obsolete as a club is with regard to a caveman. I mean,
Yes.
they're just not true, and there's plenty of data indicating that those things are routinely violated, but physicists have a myopic view of life and simply do not look. They literally forbid the looking at data that violate those things. So we're just waiting for, and the minds are very stubborn. And I'm a university professor. I live with these people. So I know the minds are very closed. And so we just have to wait for generational replacement, which is something that Max Planck taught us, well over 100 years ago, around the turn of the century, the last century, that, big changes in science don't really happen because someone comes up with a new idea. What really happens is people are very stuck in the mud, and you have to wait for generational replacement with a group of people who were acclimatized to certain ideas, retire and die off, and are replaced by the new generation. But that doesn't really solve the problem, because that means that the new generation are stuck in the mud with regard to their ideas.
Yeah, that's right.
What's very, very interesting is how difficult it is for people to change their ideas once they are set in stone. That's the big issue with regard to extraterrestrial life, with regard to many of the projects we do at the Farsight Institute, with regard to remote viewing. It's not that people haven't come up with great ideas. It's that the current people are the same.
Courtney, are you with us on the Secret Teachings?
I am here.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Ryan. I want to thank you so much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. I'm also here with my guest host, Ira Robinson. He's very interested in remote viewing. I think he's done a little himself as well. Isn't that right, Ira?
I have indeed. I've experimented with it quite a bit over the years, and I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you, Courtney, and hear your salient thoughts on the whole subject.
Hey, Ira, it's great to speak with you.
I just wanted to make sure that we've got everything right. Farsight.org is the website.
That's right.
All right.
That's right. FARSIGHT.
Perfect. And you also have farsightpresentations.com and CourtneyBrown.com links to go check out your work and you a little bit on your biography. And maybe we can actually start with that. Give me a little bit of a background on you. who is Courtney Brown and what you're trying to accomplish with this research.
Sure. Well, I am a university professor at a major university, but I don't do any of the remote viewing research at the university. At the university, I teach mathematics in a social science program, usually statistics and differential equations, things like that. But the remote viewing research I do at the Farsight Institute. That's FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G, and that's like seeingfar.org. And that is the largest venue. Actually, I can say it's the largest, biggest, and best because it's the only venue where you can get these full-blown public projects on remote viewing, as it is done using procedures, methodologies that were derived by the U.S. military and used actively for espionage purposes, or methodologies that are derivative of those procedures. So, we're the only show in town where this happens. There's a lot of people talking about doing remote viewing, but in terms of seeing it in action, we're it.
So you guys are really the only institute that is researching this phenomenon.
Well, you have other people researching it, other individuals researching it, but we're the only one where these full-blown projects using the best remote viewers on the planet Earth are done so that the public can see it. And so you have other people doing it, but they do it in a very different way. There are thousands of people who have written articles about remote viewing, but those are always like research done behind closed doors, and it's usually dealing with untrained college kids who are told how to remote view for 15 minutes, and then they're looking for statistically significant results, which they often find. But these procedures are, to be masterful of them, these procedures really take years of dedicated practice. It's probably, in order to get world-class good, like the remote viewers that we work with are, it's very much like Lang Lang playing the piano in Carnegie Hall. Anybody can play the piano, and you can make noise. You can demonstrate that the piano does, in fact, play music, and you can do things with it. But it's hard to play the piano. And if you really want to get good, like Lang Lang, where everything just sort of flows in playing Carnegie Hall, that took a lot of effort and a lot of time and a huge amount of practice. And that's what remote viewing is like. If this was really easy to do, we wouldn't be having shows about this. We wouldn't be talking about this as an ooh-ah phenomenon. If it was really easy to do, everybody would already know it, like breathing. Do you have to have a show on how to breathe? Everybody knows how to breathe. Well, remote viewing, you can get intuitions, but to get them so that they're highly structured, spot on every time, and that the intuitions and the descriptions of these things called targets are so perfect that it's like they were there with their own eyes. Remember, remote viewing is a mental process for perceiving across time and space, an apparent complete violation of the laws of physics as they were taught at the university, which is a real joke at the university level, because the laws of physics, the fundamental paradigms of quantum mechanics and relativistic physics, those are the billboards of physics taught in universities worldwide, are over 100 years old. Those fundamentals haven't changed a dime for over 100 years. So they're wrong. Science never stays still just for stuff like that. Now, the details have changed. I'm a mathematician, so I really appreciate the improvements and the advances that have been done mathematically with regard to quantum mechanics and relativistic physics. But, despite the fact that we know some of the details much better, we do quantum computing now. We have merged the relativity realm, which used to be just in the macro big realm like you and I, with the quantum realm to produce what's called the standard model. But despite all those sort of finesses, those are details around the edges. The big fundamentals haven't changed for way over 100 years. And so, you're really talking about a revolution, not just in social sciences, archaeological revolution. I mean, you're not talking about just sort of applied revolutions, but revolutions in the way of thought with regard to the very basic fundamentals of physics. Now, we do have a very good idea of the physics of remote viewing, how it actually does work. And great advances have been made, but they're same as the past people, which are people get stuck. And the real trick in helping this planet and changing the planet and saving humanity and doing all that good, cool, interesting stuff is trying to come up with a way, an angle to get around the psychology of mass belief systems. That's the real thing. It's not really an issue of discovering some new technical wizardry or discovering some new theory. The issue is a mass psychology of humans that is rigid as the Rock of Gibraltar, and we're trying to find ways to get around it. We're looking for elements of theater shock at this point. Really, it's not an issue of discovering things. We've discovered a zillion things. The issue is, how do you wake up a humanity that's comatose, or better yet, is like petrified rock?
Yeah, people are scared. They're fearful. Courtney, a lot of scientists nowadays, it seems, they do their investigations, if they're considered real scientists, I guess, and what they'll do is they'll find evidence to support a preconceived conclusion, and any evidence to the contrary they just wipe away as being nonsense.
That's exactly what happened. This is really a big deal in archaeological realms. For example, my son, who's just now graduating from with a degree in archaeology, he was out in the desert last summer talking to some archaeological graduate students and saying, well, what about these other archaeological things? You know, things that were discovered, like devices, hammers, things like that, buried in strata that were, you know, millions of years old, clearly out of time and place. What about those things? There's apparently a huge record of stuff like that. And they looked at him straight in the face and said, if we even talk about that stuff, we are banned for life in the discipline. We can't get published. We can't get a job. Nothing works. So just be quiet.
That's literally that's exactly what we were talking. Ira and I were talking about last week on another show. We were talking about how there are literally there is physical evidence and photographic evidence of footprints that have been found in coal seams that date back 12 million years, and they're footprints of a ribbed sole shoe. They're footprints that they're like a size 10 shoe that are found in the Gobi Desert. The Russians and the Chinese found this during a joint expedition a couple of decades ago. And scientists, archaeologists, they just, like you said, they write it off. And if they speak about it, then they're relieved from their field. I mean, it's just like doctors who talk about cancer cures. They can have their medical license stripped.
Yeah, actually, that's the same with, that's exactly the same. So, you know, there's some